Igor Tudor has now officially been announced by the club as the interim boss.
I mean, I'm here not to enjoy, I'm here to work.
And still Ricky Villa! What a fantastic run! He scored!
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, it's there!
Here's Lucas Moura! Oh, they've done it! The wait for silverware is over!
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Tottenham Way podcast. I am Marcus Buckland, safely back from my travels and thrilled to be in the company of George Sessions from the Press Association and Tom Barclay from The Sun, who has, well, I don't want to start with a hugely negative fact, but basically we know Spurs have been struggling. I wasn't fully aware that as we record this podcast, it is now 101 days since Tottenham last won a Premier League game. And we have been musing just before the start of the show as to whether that's some kind of unwelcome record. I don't know, maybe during COVID it was longer. Whatever is the case, 101 days stretching back to that victory against Crystal Palace at the end of December is horrendous. But things have changed. Roberto De Zerbi has arrived. I think he's made quite a good impression early on. We're going to talk about his early days. We'll look ahead to the Sunderland game and try and work out who is going to play. I mean, again, there are some issues regarding that. And also, straight off the bat, I'd like to ask you to like and to subscribe to the show. We are very close to our 3,000th subscriber. And whoever that proves to be is going to get a free copy of Tom's brilliant book, Miracle in Bilbao, which he wrote a few months ago off the back of Tottenham Hotspur's magnificent success in the Europa League. So there is the incentive. Please like and subscribe and hype and do everything else to further boost our community. We love hearing from you. And if you've got any questions, any thoughts, etc., bring them in to us straight away, because I think we're going to have a little bit of a squad audit at some stage in April. But having hit you with all those facts, let's get down to business. And first of all, George, I want to come to you with regards to Roberto De Zerbi. Before we look in more detail at what tactically he might attempt to do in the early stages, we know he's a very complex manager, but he's going to have to dumb things down. First thing he had to do, you made this point very clearly, was address the Mason Greenwood issue. And he did that straight away. I get the impression that most people were pretty satisfied with what he had to say about the whole thing. Were you?
Yeah, I've got to say, I hoped the club would ask him about it, but when it's in-house, very much, it is a case of ignoring that and focusing on all the positives. So I think first of all, credit to the club for actually addressing that, because it felt like it had to be addressed, and if it wasn't going to be in that interview, it was obviously going to be this coming Friday when he faces us for the first time. I'll read out some of his comments for anyone that's not seen it. I won't read the whole shebang, but paraphrase a little bit. He said, "I never wanted to downplay the issue of violence against women or violence against anyone more broadly. I'm sorry if I offended anyone's feelings with this subject matter. I have a daughter and I'm very sensitive to these things, and I always have been. I hope over time people will get to know me better and will understand that at that moment, I didn't mean to take a stance." And this is obviously referring to his kind of, backing in public of Mason Greenwood after Mason Greenwood left Man United in 2023 over some serious allegations, which the charges later got dropped. I was pleased that he said sorry essentially for those comments, and also just reiterated, I think, what was the obvious thing to do, but just had to happen. That he's against domestic abuse. I guess it's probably more now in the court of the real fan groups and the fans that are really, really affected by this, because it's a shame really that this appointment has split the fan base, and there's no getting away from that. You've had the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust putting out a very strong statement because they've had members go to them and say that they weren't happy with it, and the three fan groups in particular, Proud Lily Whites, Women of the Lane and Spurs Reach, all made their feelings clear before the appointment. I guess from my point of view, I'm pleased he said sorry. I think maybe kind of a closing of the chapter in sort of my eyes, but not somebody that's huge, that's been massively affected by this, would be maybe to try and speak to those groups. I think just to kind of understand a little bit better their feelings, and then you can kind of bridge that sort of breakdown in relationship that's clearly happened here. But yeah, I'm pleased that he did, did acknowledge that. I think there will be probably a few more questions on Friday about it. And I think the real kind of closing of the chapter will come when those fan groups or those fans, I've seen fans say that they're not going to be going to games and, getting behind the club, whilst he's manager, which is their, that's their opinion, that's their feeling. They're entitled to that. And, I don't think fans can be too angry about that, because that is how people feel about this subject. And it's clearly, brings up strong feelings, and understandably so. But yeah, I'd like to hope that if, the club and Roberto can sort of try and bridge this kind of distance between the three fan groups I've mentioned, and himself, that maybe over time it can be a kind of, chapter closed on this. Because it's, obviously when a new manager comes in, you want to have that excitement. You want to be kind of looking at all the things he's going to bring to the team. But that was such a big issue that it had to be kind of addressed. And I think it's a good first step, I'd say, in putting that to bed by addressing it. And hopefully a bit more work down the line, and everyone really will be unified behind Roberto De Zerbi.
Yeah, I do sincerely hope so. We've had too much division for different reasons over the years. You were either with Ange, you were against Ange. You were either with Thomas Frank. I don't think too many people were with Thomas Frank. You were against Thomas Frank. Then who should come in? Who should do this? Who should do that? The way the club is run, we've been so disunited. And I think that was very encouraging, actually, what De Zerbi had to say. Yes, hopefully that will be an issue that can eventually be resolved once and for all. I mean, Tom, another question mark when he signed, of course, it was the 5-year deal. Why are they giving a man who never lasts more than a couple of years a 5-year deal, all that money, etc., etc.? Is he going to leave if the dreaded occurrence occurs? It's not very good English, and Spurs get relegated, but it seems as though he is definitely going to stay. I mean, is that the case? Bottom line, if something awful happens over the next few weeks, would you be entirely surprised if he walked away?
Well, he's said it now, hasn't he? He said that he's going to stay. He'll be the Tottenham manager next season, whatever happens. So if suddenly something changes on that front, he's going to have a lot of angry fans and will look quite foolish. I was very encouraged by that comment. I wasn't exactly expecting that from that first interview. It's definitely one of the topics that I had on my list to ask him when we do our first press conference with him on Friday ahead of the Sunderland game. But I think he's covered it off, hasn't he, really? He said he's going to be there no matter what. And that's really exciting. I know he comes with this controversy around Greenwood, but if you sort of park that for one side, I've been saying that I think since our first ever podcast, Marcus, where we launched this before George joined us back at a couple of seasons ago, was talking about De Zerbi being a possibility, long term the Spurs should look at. I just think his football can be really, really exciting. He's a football visionary in a lot of ways. And the idea of him sticking with Spurs, even if they get relegated, is going to make one hell of a story if that does happen. Obviously, we hope it doesn't. And if they do go down, then he'll have to back it up by staying. But I think it's to put down a marker and say it like that suggests that he's going to stay.
Well, you're right. He would look foolish if he did walk away now. I know George isn't convinced. I think he'd be a great manager in the Championship. I don't for 1 minute want Spurs to be relegated, but I am old enough to remember the year they went down. It was a lot of fun. Life has changed since then, financially more than anything else. But if we were to be in the Championship with De Zerbi, I remember us beating Bristol Rovers 9-0. We had some magnificent performances at a lower level. I could see us running riot all over the country. So anyway, we shall see. What I'm even more interested in, Tom, though, is his tactical approach to these next 7 games. Now, everyone was quoting Lewis Dunk when De Zerbi went to Brighton, and they said for the first few weeks they hadn't got a clue what he was trying to get them to do, because obviously he's a very intelligent man with all sorts of ideas. It took 5 games, I think, at Brighton before they started to understand what was required of the players. Now, obviously, that can't happen here with only 7 games to go. So what do you reckon a dumbed down version of De Zerbi tactics is? What should we expect from Tottenham over the next few weeks?
Yeah, well, that's a big question that we're going to find out soon. I suppose, in short, then perhaps a little less on the floor than what he would hope it would be. I think he said before how much it's something like doesn't like to crane his neck watching the ball go high, but I still think they're going to be a bit of long ball to begin with, try and get him out of this situation. Not all the time, obviously, and maybe slightly fewer risks at the back than we might see further down the line once hopefully he's kept them up and starts to really implement his style. I mean, so much of it is about sort of baiting the press at Brighton, in particular, bringing in fullbacks to become a bit like Ange, to be honest. Bringing in fullbacks to create little sort of trios of players to work around players, but having said that, that was also a while ago, and a lot of teams. The reason I sort of call him a bit of a football visionary is it did feel like he not only did he transform Brighton into a team that made Europe for the first time in their 125-year history, but he also kind of changed the game a little bit. Not as much as Pep Guardiola, obviously, but a lot of teams reacted to the way Brighton played under De Zerbi and sort of incorporated a lot of that style into the way they played. I mean, I remember covering the England under-21s back in 2023, where Levi Colwill, who was at Brighton at the time, had this moment again. I think it was in the semi-final against Israel. Yeah, it really annoyed the Israeli media and their fans, where he basically just sat on the halfway line, had his foot on the ball, and just didn't move for what felt like 15 seconds, maybe more, waiting for the press, which never came from Israel. And that came straight out of what I remember watching Brighton do something similar. It was the idea of baiting the other team to come and have a go and then knocking around it. But that's kind of, a lot of teams have adapted to that. So what will be fascinating is to see how De Zerbi, 2.0 responds to that and changes it up again. But obviously he's got such a limited time and such a desperate situation that Tottenham find themselves in, that a lot of that I can't see happening until hopefully he's kept them up next season and gets a full pre-season. Back to those Lewis Dunk comments. I mean, Lewis Dunk, it came from an interview he did back in 2023 when he was with England, and he was talking about the first couple of weeks, and overall he was overwhelmingly positive about Roberto De Zerbi because, of course, he turned Lewis Dunk. Lewis Dunk's probably, along with Jason Steele, who's just made the England squad, probably the most transformed player in England under De Zerbi that I can think of. He went from being a no-nonsense defender who was a really reliable centre-back under Chris Hughton than the Graham Potter years, where he did improve passing out from the back, but turned into one of the best ball-playing centre-backs in Europe for a time, got into the England squad, obviously went to the Euros. But he was talking about those first couple of weeks, and he said it was carnage and baffling. I think a lot of that comes down to De Zerbi's English was very, very limited at the time. So obviously that's better now, albeit he has been in Marseille for a couple of years. So I don't think it's going to be perfect. I think we'll find that in the press conference on Friday. He's a bit rusty and we'll have a translator. But obviously it was also trying to bring in all these new ideas. It was a mid-season appointment, but it was back in September where Brighton obviously had lost Potter to Chelsea, but they had the time to kind of do a sort of crash course in De Zerbi's style, and could afford to not win in their first 5 games to get through it. Obviously, Tottenham aren't in that position now. So, back to what I said at the beginning, I think it will be a very sort of pared down version of what he wants to do in the future. And that's why, and Adam Lallana actually said that. So Lallana was another player who was absolutely influential for Brighton under De Zerbi. Absolutely loved him to bits. He's a real tactical mind, Lallana. And he said, didn't he, in an interview with TalkSport, I think the day after De Zerbi got appointed, he said he's not going to be stupid enough to try and do all of that straight away. He realises the situation that they're in. So we're going to see a De Zerbi light to begin with, for sure.
I think what excites me more than anything is that, and look, clearly this group of players deserve criticism for being where they are because it's been diabolical, but I've always just looked at this group and thought, at heart, most of them just want to play attacking football, and I just don't think they've ever really been able to do that with the structure of both Thomas Frank and Igor Tudor. And I think that's what clearly De Zerbi's not going to come in, or we don't think he is, and play De Zerbi ball straight away. But I think even just bringing in kind of attacking principles, and there was a training video of him and Solanke's receiving the ball, and then he goes up to Solanke and sort of moves his shape. And just that kind of attention to detail in attack, I think, should instantly bring some level of improvement. Because Spurs, do have good attacking players, but they just haven't looked like it this season. But they do, the CVs and even previous seasons tell you that. And I think if they can be set up in more of an attacking structure and be given more kind of patterns of play, and more people can press forward, because that was used to drive me crazy with Thomas Frank's team. You'd see Kudus bombing forward, and then maybe Richarlison at the back post, and that would be it. The two midfielders would be so deep. So even just throwing men forward and sort of working religiously on the attack over these next few weeks should make a difference. And I think it will suit the players a lot better to be playing attacking football rather than trying to soak up pressure and defend.
I agree. I just want to jump back in, because whilst we've been recording, we have some breaking news about De Zerbi's backroom team. Been waiting for this update about the coaching staff. Obviously, since Igor Tudor left, he left with a few staff, but there was a whole bunch of them that was still there. We were wondering what was going to happen. I know there was some speculation about Alessandro Nesta. I'd heard that wasn't going to be the case, and wrote that a few days ago. And that is correct. He's not part of it. So Spurs have just done an update. So, and they say that they can now confirm the full structure of the first team coaching staff. Marcatili and Marcello Quinto join as first team fitness coach. So Marcatili, the fitness coach, and Quinto, the senior professional development phase coach. Senior professional development phase coach. I think we might have to unpack what that actually means, Marcus. Marcatilio, who's also known as Marco.
Please do.
Yeah, George, maybe as I'm reading this out, you can have a think about what that might mean. Marcatilio, also known as Marco, brings a wealth of experience to the role. He began working with Roberto in 2015 at Italian side Foggia, and has been a part of his backroom staff since. That was something we were half expecting. He's worked with a lot of the same people throughout his role, so we're wondering who was going to come in from that. Marcello Quinto also has worked closely with Roberto, worked with him at Brighton and Marseille. They joined the existing coaching staff, which includes Bruno Salter, who is a Brighton legend. I think he left Brighton when Potter went to Chelsea. He worked with Potter there, and West Ham, and where else was Potter? I'm trying to remember now. And I guess Brighton. So I'm not sure if Roberto De Zerbi has actually worked with Bruno, but he will do now. Bruno's going to stay on as assistant. Andreas Georgeson, the man we always see in the touchline whenever there's a set piece, he's down as assistant coach, but effectively the set piece coach. He's still there. Cameron Campbell, the individual development coach, which is quite an interesting role that Thomas Frank sort of brought in, working sort of on a one-to-one basis with players, which Thomas Frank had done years and years ago when he used to work with Johan Lang as a coach back in Denmark 20 years ago. He stays on. Fabian Otter, the goalkeeping coach, stays on as well, and they'll be supported by Stuart Lewis and Dean Brill as well. So those guys all sticking around, and the two new additions to Roberto's coaching staff. I do wonder, just to say this now, obviously we're in this position where it's obviously an appointment that's been made with a few weeks break because of the international break and no FA Cup action, but overall it's a mid-season appointment in a quite desperate situation. I wonder if in the summer things might change again, but that's me purely speculating right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, so many things could happen between now and the summer. You mentioned Fabian Otter. I think he's going to have his work cut out over the next few days. We've got to talk about the goalkeeping situation shortly. The one thing I want to just say about De Zerbi in general, and why I'm excited that he's coming, I think if you cast your eye around the footballing world at the moment for the best possible manager to have come to Spurs, for me, it was him. And bottom line, that's why it has to be the right appointment. But he has got to hit the ground running. I mean, I'm really excited, George, because I've read some reports. Your colleague, Alistair Gold in particular, gave us, I think, 5 reasons why the players were very excited after the first training session. They were apparently all going home buzzing, loving what they'd been shown. You know, you've mentioned just a little tweet that was delivered to Solanke. It certainly seems as though right from the word go, they have taken to his guidance. But then, and I know it's going to be dumbed down now, but I'm also terrified at the prospect, particularly if Kinski's coming into the goal at Sunderland on Sunday, if we're going to be risking anything at the back, I mean, I'm scarred from all those horrible, dangerous moments we've endured inside the Tottenham box over the past couple of years. I'm also mindful of Dan Kilpatrick going back a couple of years, saying to me, I'm an old man screaming at the clouds. It's all about playing out from the back. Blah-de-blah. I know it is when you've got the right players, but in the current circumstances, it could be enough to give us all cardiac arrests over the next couple of weeks, couldn't it?
Yeah, I was just going to make that comment, Marcus. You're shouting at the clouds. You're going to be shouting at the clouds for the next 7-8 weeks. That is deservable. It really is. And when it works, it is thrilling. As myself, but probably Tom Moore, having covered Brighton more than me, has seen over the last few years. The thing is, I think that he actually does have the players. I know. It feels strange to say this, but I look at Romero and I think Romero is so good for that baiting of the press. The problem for him is he's not had the options in front of him. And even Mickey van der Ven, when I love to watch Tottenham attack is when Mickey van der Ven gets out of his feet and whips a pass out to either the left back or the left winger. And then normally actually is the left midfield, and then Udogie, if he's on the left, if he's fit and as left back, is then overlapping. And that's when everyone is kind of, the bodies are getting forward. But look, it's going to be a bit of a difficult watch if he does bring that in straight away. I imagine, thinking sort of out loud here, I think he probably would try to bring that in as a sort of, in a variation, basically. So it's not going to be full on De Zerbi ball. And if there is a moment where the options are not on, then he probably would tell the team to go long, which obviously Ange didn't really do. And then towards the end, they were given the license to do that. But as I say, these players did play that very well at points under Ange. So I think this suits them. Certainly the defenders, Porro is a brilliant passer of the ball. Udogie's probably the weakest, I'd say, out of the four that we would think that's going to be mainly starting in terms of Porro, Romero, Van der Ven, and Udogie. But Spence is very good on the ball, generally with his passing. Obviously, his right-footed passing, not so much his left. So I think actually that this will not be too bad as long as they have the options, and that is a bit of an issue because clearly Tottenham's midfield doesn't feel ideal for Roberto De Zerbi on paper. I think Archie Gray could do a good job, and I guess you'd look at someone like João Palhinha and say, well, in this situation, he'd be brilliant, but I just don't think he's going to suit what De Zerbi wants his midfielders to do. So I'm really intrigued to see where he goes from that point of view. But I think passing out from the back is probably coming back, and you're just going to have to put up with it, Marcus, and hope that it reaches the destination. It doesn't get intercepted. It probably will do at times, but hopefully it's more successful than not.
But the added complication, of course, is that it looks as though Vicario won't be available at Sunderland on Sunday. We're not sure about that. He went for the operation. They said it'd be around about a month. So maybe they're going to rush him back. If not, Tom, I guess it's Kinski who has to come in. We all know what happened to him in the Champions League. I mean, this is a massive ask for the player and for the management to give him the confidence and the belief to do what's going to be expected of him from the word go.
Yeah, I mean, you could say about pretty much all the players, Roberto De Zerbi has got a big, confidence lift job on his hands, but none more so than Anthony Kinski. I mean, that last game, I still gives me chills thinking about that game in the Metropolitano. George, we were there, and hooked after 17 minutes, after 2 howlers inside the first 15 minutes. Unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. But he, from what I'm told, he's a pretty strong character, Kinski, and is very keen to have another go, basically, and show that he's not scarred by it. Tudor obviously put his faith in him afterwards, and I think you can tell that by the fact that, was it the Liverpool game or was it the Forest game where he only had one goalkeeper on the bench? Might be in the Forest game, and it was Kinski. There was a bit of question mark, while there were two keepers on the bench, when there were so many players out. Obviously, Brandon Austin was there as well, and you thought, well, if there's a situation where he suddenly has to bring him on, if Vicario gets injured or sent off, we just won't know until it happens who he'll turn to. But then that moment, that game came along, he thought, okay, so he does have faith in Kinski and backed up all the things he'd said publicly, Tudor. Obviously, he's gone now, and it's down to De Zerbi to to put his faith in as well. I mean, in theory, I say with a big in theory because Kinski is, I want to say, is supposed to be very good with his feet, because when he first came in, we saw that when he was confident, kicking off both feet in those first couple of games against Liverpool, particularly against Liverpool, he was really showing a sort of a lot of skill in that. And then, but I guess it's not really fair because he slipped up. It's not so much like a bad pass because he's inaccurate. It's because he fell over. But I don't think it's not completely irrelevant to the conversation about his ability with his feet. So, but in theory, if he can sort of get to grips with that, he is arguably better than Vicario, or definitely better than Vicario with his feet. So maybe he might even suit De Zerbi's style even more. And look, I know from Brighton that De Zerbi can sort of chuck in a sort of curveball when it comes to a player you think is sort of set to be a key player and then suddenly isn't. And he did that in goal at Brighton, didn't he, with Robert Sanchez? I mean, I think he wasn't particularly impressed with Sanchez's attitude, so that was part of it. But he brought in Jason Steele, who'd had kind of middling lower league career, not had that many appearances, but by all accounts a really good character, which is part of why he's come into the England squad recently. But he really justified it. He was fantastic for that Brighton team. So maybe he can do the same thing for Kinski. If Vicario is indeed out for this match, we're still waiting to find out.
I tell you one thing: if I'm part of the Sunderland ground staff, I am watering those two penalty areas big time before kickoff. I'm just going to tempt that option. And just one other point here. I mean, poor old Brandon Austin. I mean, if he's not going to get a look in now, he never will. George, you've got great knowledge about the whole Tottenham setup. I seem to recall seeing him, was it a European match not that long ago? And I thought he looked half decent. But obviously he's going to have to look to further his career somewhere else, isn't he?
Yeah, it was Hoffenheim away early 2025, wasn't it? I think Fraser Forster, Vicario was injured. Fraser Forster had also just got injured and Kinski wasn't registered. So Brandon Austin came in and did a really good job, actually. I did quite a good job, I would say, against Hoffenheim. He did give away a penalty, which got rescinded. And he also actually played, it was Newcastle. I think he played against Newcastle. Yeah.
Played all right.
He played against... Yeah, I think in the games he's played, he's looked okay, but I just think there's that feeling at the club that he's not at the level that's going to be required. And look, you do need an opportunity to prove that wrong, but you kind of have to remember that so many different managers have been able to work with him and haven't given him that chance. So that sort of does generally tell you something. But I think he's probably happy at Spurs, to be honest, because, the life of this third choice goalkeeper is not so bad, is it really? They could sort of, earn a lot less money going down the leagues and there's a lot more pressure, or you can be part of a high, elite level environment and also contribute because, he would have felt like he contributed last season towards the Europa League, and he did because he played that one game and Spurs won. We'll obviously have to ask him if that ever came about, but I'd imagine he's fairly satisfied with the role he's in at the minute.
I think it's a strange one, isn't it? I think it's pretty strange. You train all your life to become a professional footballer, and then you take up this role where you might not ever play. But I get it. Saying about the Newcastle game. If I'm right, that was the first game of 2025, and I think we went into that game thinking, 2024 was pretty disastrous. 2025 will be so much better. From a league perspective, obviously they had the Europa League and they lost that game and it was disastrous. And then we went into 2026, didn't we, thinking, right, it can't be that bad. They haven't won a game since.
It can. It really can.
I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, Marcus, about goalkeepers is about Vicario, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of talk in Italy, and I'm sort of hearing it too, that he is expected really at this point to move on in the summer, or at least there's a big chance that he goes probably back to Italy. Inter Milan have got strong interest. I think that'd be a really good move for him, to be fair, if he's going to leave Spurs. I know his stock's fallen with a lot of fans at Tottenham, And in the Premier League generally, I think people see him sometimes as a vulnerability of Spurs, and I would argue rightly so to a certain extent. But it seems like his stock is still pretty high in Italy. Donnarumma is obviously the man for the Azzurri because he's such a fantastic goalkeeper. One of the greatest in modern times. But Vicario is very much the backup to him. He's appreciated over there. Inter Milan look like they're going to change goalkeepers, so I would not be surprised if that one comes off. And then that would obviously lead to what the Tottenham do next. I did a story yesterday that they are having a look at or monitoring James Trafford's situation at Man City. Trafford's had a good couple of weeks, to be fair. He got a clean sheet against Liverpool in the FA Cup. He obviously made his England debut. I was there to watch him against, I think it was the Uruguay game rather than Japan game, and he did well. And he's really highly rated, really, really impressive keeper. But and City obviously spent a lot of money to bring him back. It'll be fascinating to see what happens with him in the summer. As far as I'm aware, it kind of might depend on what the situation is with Pep Guardiola. If he stays or goes, if someone else comes in, then maybe that could change things. But can you really see City having a keeper like Donnarumma on the wages he's on, being on the bench? I'm not sure I can. I'm not really sure what other club buys him with the wages he's on. So I feel like, personally, it'd be surprising to not see him be the number one for City next season, which would mean Trafford would have to stick to being the cup goalkeeper like he is at the moment, which is pretty sure he doesn't want to do. So that might open the door for a move elsewhere. That doesn't necessarily mean that Tottenham get him. I think Newcastle, who wanted him before, probably in the driving seat. There are other clubs as well. But like I say, he's one of the keepers, along with Bart Verbruggen of Brighton, who De Zerbi worked with there. Two of the keepers I've heard that the Spurs are sort of looking at the moment.
Yeah, I read your article with great interest, and I've got nothing against James Trafford. I feel bad for him in a way, because as soon as I think of Trafford now, I think of the start of this season when Spurs went to Manchester City and won, and George, shrewd old George, in the pod before the game said, "I think we've got to try and pinpoint any potential lapses that Trafford may be guilty of with his relative lack of experience," and that's exactly what happened. He did not have a very good game, and I'm sorry to say I don't want James Trafford to come to Tottenham. George, listen, first of all, Vicario is not as bad as everybody has said, but he's lost his confidence. It would be definitely, I think, in his interest to go back to Italy. Absolutely no doubt about that. It would suit Spurs as well. But for me, we have got to come up with a much more experienced goalkeeper. I don't want us to keep bringing in young potential players who might work or might not. The goalkeeping situation is crucial. One of the biggest mistakes Spurs made over the past few years was passing up on the possibility of signing David Raya and going for Vicario instead. We've got to learn from our mistakes. I appreciate there aren't a whole host of great goalkeepers out there, but for me, that would be an unnecessary risk. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think I do agree, actually, because on the surface, I do like James Trafford. I've always quite liked him. I remember his heroics for the under-21s couple of summers back. But I don't think at 23, I think it is a risk, isn't it, to spend a decent, sizable amount of money on him at 23, and then you hope that he's going to be ready now to be the number one. It's all well and good, signing him this summer as the number one, but then what if he starts poorly? What you then put in Kinski, who's even younger than him, is even a less amount of experience. In many ways, actually, Spurs probably should have sort of held off with signing Kinski when they did, and maybe have signed James Trafford last summer. Really, I think that would have made more sense, and then he could have supported Vicario and pushed Vicario, and maybe kind of at the end of next season, if you'd like to see Vicario's form hadn't dropped to the cliff, he would be ready to be the number one. But I presume he wanted first team football. I think he was promised that, wasn't it, at Man City? And then they kind of gazumped him by signing Donnarumma on the last day of the summer window. Yeah, I think as much as I think James Trafford is a good goalkeeper, I think Spurs have probably got to try and get someone who's more of a sure bet for now. It's been the way, hasn't it, for so long that Spurs have signed potential. And, as much as I love Archie Gray and Luke Bergvall and even Tell, for us going down that route, I think for the goalkeeper position, I think that's a risk that you probably can't take after 2 seasons where we hope the club have narrowly avoided relegation.
Now, as we look at the other players who are perhaps going to be key ingredients in the De Zerbi survival plan, I've got to just throw in Cristian Romero to you all, who, and I'm not going to criticise him because it sounds as though the club had reached a deal with him some time ago to allow him to have an extra day before returning after international duty, and Roberto De Zerbi doesn't appear to have had any issue with that. I think we've all got more of an issue with Romero's father chiming in at an unfortunate moment to further muddy the waters in terms of where his future might lie. It's going to be an interesting few games, isn't it, for Romero, because he is essential to the Tottenham survival cause. But I think, Tom, it's fair to say a growing number of supporters have become increasingly frustrated, certainly with his perceived attitude. And I would throw Van der Ven into the mix there as well, although I think he's perhaps been misquoted to some degree. But where's Romero at for you right now as we begin this crucial 7-game period?
Yeah, one fan told me the other day he called him I can say it right, an enigma, and I think that really sums him up. Really, Romero, isn't he? He's such a crucial player, such a talented player, such a leader in the dressing room, and yet it comes with all this baggage, all these off the field stuff, which just, as you say, muddies the waters. I mean, George has already said Romero feels like he's perfect for the De Zerbi blueprint, the style of play with his defence splitting passes. Could see that working really, really well. You know, he's a better footballer than Lewis Dunk. And like I said before, look what De Zerbi did with Lewis Dunk. But then on the other hand, Lewis Dunk seems like such a player who's not going to give you any problems, I suppose. Whereas Romero, it's going to be a bit of a headache, isn't he? Such an influential figure, but so's De Zerbi. De Zerbi's definitely his own man. I don't think he'll really put up with anything that he doesn't appreciate. And you could definitely argue that maybe Thomas Frank was a bit too lax with Romero. He sort of let him get away with the first. I say let him get away. We're not quite sure exactly what. Well, in fact, we know he didn't find him because we asked him after the first, Instagram post after the Bournemouth game, wasn't it? Where he talked about the ownership telling lies effectively before redacting it later. And then when he did it again about a month later.
Just what you... Sorry, but I mean, the more you think about this, Tom, it's just what you want from your captain, isn't it? The place is it's a madhouse.
Yeah, and then a month later he did something similar, didn't he? And I don't think Frank ever said whether he did fine him or not, but I don't know. Do you know what's a really, really interesting question? Is Romero going to stay as his captain? That'd be one of the first questions actually on Friday. That'll be an interesting talk about. I presume he will. He's such an influence in the dressing room that I think that would be quite a thing to do that. Albeit maybe it might assert his authority very quickly. I don't know. Probably more for one in the summer where it fits in. But yeah, just back to the release clause there. I mean, the sort of that first emerged, or a story in Spain, I think, emerged. About 3 weeks ago, something like that there was a release clause in Romero's contract. And we were talking about at the time going, that would make sense because it was such a surprise that that he signed his new deal last summer to a certain extent. You know, you think maybe there was something like that in there. Tottenham sources played it down, said it wasn't the case. And it was sort of suggested that there was more of this gentleman's agreement with Daniel Levy, which again, the club would never say that they have that with multi-million-pound contracts. But then when you look at what Kane said, what Bale said, it's kind of, I put this in this sort of bracket of like, when we talk about transfer bids, what's a bid and does it have to be written down on paper to constitute a real bid, or whether it's a verbal agreement? It's a bit murky, isn't it? But it does seem like either way, there must be some sort of agreement or sort of, something between the club and Romero to a certain extent now, particularly since his dad's come out and said between 50 and 70 million euros, was it? So it doesn't help in this situation. And I remember talking about him last season when he first did that interview with an Argentinian journalist, basically saying, I feel like maybe it's the time for him to move on. He's such a talented player, but he's just not really worth the hassle. And that's before you talk about his ill discipline on the pitch, which actually then wasn't too bad. This year is much different, isn't it? He's been a real liability and missed so many games, which have really contributed to Spurs' plight, I would say. But then wouldn't it be so Romero, just like last year when he came back to play an absolutely pivotal role in going all the way in the Europa League, to come into this De Zerbi team, play out of his skin, get Spurs out of trouble, and then we'll be back in it in the summer going, well, he's got to stay. He's their best player. That again sums up the enigma that is Cristian Romero.
I think that it's certainly in everybody's interest, including Romero's, because he has let himself down at times this season, that he does come back and he plays a blinder, makes sure that Spurs survive. And then, frankly, as much of an enigma as he is, I wish you hadn't brought that word in. It's a really hard one to say. But, George, I think it's time for him to go. And I'm going to ask both of you very quickly, come the start of next season, do you see Romero and Van de Ven still at Tottenham? Because my answer to that in both instances is no.
Yeah, I would say one of them would go. I would be very surprised if the club, just from kind of an ambition point of view, were to sell both of them. I think that smacks a little bit of a lack of ambition, even though they've both been really poor. But you are basically, getting rid of two players that you've signed in the last few years that you thought were going to be your kind of Virgil van Dijk, etc. I think one of them probably goes. At the minute, I would actually probably lean more towards Mickey van der Ven, just from the kind of point of view that with Romero and De Zerbi, I sort of feel like that could be, a marriage made in heaven in a way, because Romero's kind of big point, I think, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but this is the kind of the optics I've always taken from the timings of when he's done stuff and what he said, is that he wants Tottenham to be ambitious. That's his main driving point. It seems, from my point of view, that, in all these times when he's criticised the club, he's saying you are not being ambitious enough. And you think with De Zerbi's coming in, and De Zerbi's going to want to be ambitious. De Zerbi's not going to turn around and be sort of downplaying what Tottenham can achieve. He's going to sort of want to try and create that dream for the fans and create the journey that Thomas Frank wasn't actually very good at. So if De Zerbi comes in and Romero sees him as kind of somebody that can take Tottenham to where he views Tottenham as being a big club and challenging for the others, I think he'd want to stay at Tottenham. I really do, because he just signed a new contract. He's been at Tottenham since 2021. It's quite a long time. He'll be well paid. His family is settled. If the club are ambitious and they're spending money in the summer, I think he would want to stay around. But obviously, the flip side is that I don't think it's been a great start from Romero. Really, De Zerbi's come in, and yes, he's been given time off to not come back for that Friday training session. But I think if that's me, and I'm the captain, and somebody new has just come in, I would discard that. I would say, I've already got plans made, but you know what? You're the new boss. I'm going to come in. I'm going to impress you. And then on top of that, you've got his dad kind of speaking about matters that are just shouldn't be spoken about now when Spurs are a point above the relegation zone. So I don't think it's been a good start. And De Zerbi is a fiery character. Romero has fired shots at people this season. There is a world where it could easily blow up. But I tend to lend on the side that I think actually, De Zerbi's ambition and his hunger to take Tottenham back to where, we all think the club belongs should chime with Romero. And hopefully them two can kind of unite in the same way that Ange and Romero united against a lot of others, really, for that second half of last season. There was a lot of probably, frustration and anger towards different directions at the club, but they united and got the job done and created history. And I'd like to hope that De Zerbi and Romero could, as I say, be a match made in heaven and not a match made in hell.
Anything's possible. TB, are one or both going in the summer with regards to Romero and VDV?
Well, there's a lot of noise around both of them, isn't there, that Spurs fans will not want to hear, whether it be Romero's dad speaking, or Romero himself, or Van de Ven just having to defend himself in press conferences over accusations of not caring enough, or doing interviews with Gary Neville. I agree with George. I don't think both will go. That'd be quite the thing for Spurs to do that. The one person we haven't mentioned in this little debate is Lukas Vuskovic, who's having a blinder of a season on loan at Hamburg, and has big ambitions himself to be a regular starter. So if he's going to come back to Spurs and not be sold in the summer, which I don't think is the plan at the moment, there's interest from a lot of clubs, then he's going to want to play. So unless the De Zerbi goes to a sort of back three, which again seems unlikely, I wonder where he fits in. Put it this way, I'd be surprised if all three of those players are at Tottenham come the start of next season. You could talk. I mean, Romero's a bit longer in the tooth than Van de Ven. He's been through this a lot. He did sign a new contract last summer, but he's seen a lot at Tottenham and seemingly been disappointed over and over again. But he is older, and who's going to buy him? Yes, Atletico Madrid want him, but if we're talking sort of 50, 60 million, well, they couldn't afford it last summer. Can they do it this year? It seems like Barcelona want to sign a new striker this summer because Lewandowski's probably going to go. And Julian Alvarez looks like he's one of their big targets. He would cost a lot of money, but say they sign him from Atletico Madrid, then obviously that would give Atletico a lot of money to maybe spend on Romero. Barcelona also sound like they want a centre-back as well. It seems more like Bastoni, who you might remember Conte wanted at Tottenham quite a few years ago into Milan. But say they don't get him, then maybe they come into the frame as well. But there are a limited amount of clubs who feel that are going to go after Romero. Whereas Van de Ven might be slightly different. His wages aren't as high, I think, than Romero. So maybe that helps. He's obviously younger. You could probably get even a bigger fee from Tottenham's point of view for Van de Ven, but then you've got more years ahead with him. So I think there are arguments both sides. I don't think both go, but I think probably one does. And thinking about it logically, maybe it's Romero to Atletico Madrid when Julian Alvarez goes to Barcelona.
Who knows? There's a lot of possibilities, and it's a good point you make actually in terms of who might want to buy Romero and Van de Ven. They're terrific players when they're playing well, but they haven't played well for a while. So, one of those people might just be questioning aspects of their character as much as anything else. Now, look, there's another player I want to ask you about who clearly was not fancied by Igor Tudor. He's been another, let's use the word again, another enigma this season, our £52 million man. Xavi, is he a De Zerbi player? Is he finally going to shine? Show us that he was worth the money the club spent on him back in the summer.
Yeah, I think he probably is a De Zerbi player. When I was kind of talking earlier about, I think this squad and these players kind of need to be attacking, Xavi springs to mind. Thomas Frank, it was so obvious, just didn't use the centre of the pitch. He would just, completely take that out, either pass it out wide or go straight into the forwards. And I don't think that ever suited Xavi. I think Xavi is not as good as James Maddison, but I think when he's at his best, he's kind of dropping deep and he's trying to link up with someone like Archie Gray, or he's trying to, bounce balls off, Destiny Udogie, Wilson Odobert. I always think Xavi looks good when he's got people around him that he can kind of combine and link with, and a lot of the time he's not had that. And clearly there's been a lot of games where he is not, he probably should have taken the onus on himself to try and make things happen, but he's not been able to do that, or he's tried and just not been good enough. But I think that De Zerbi's team, when I kind of think of his team at Brighton, and maybe Tom will correct me, but Alexis McAllister was kind of given a little bit of that sort of more freer role. I think it was Caicedo and Pascal Gross as the sort of two deeper midfielders, and then McAllister was allowed to sort of bomb forward. And I think that, Xavi could kind of do that because actually, for all the criticism he's had, he does work hard, and he does put his foot in. I remember in that Atletico game, I think he sort of won more ball recoveries than anyone else in the whole game. That's the number 10 you're talking about. So he does work hard. So I'd like to think that De Zerbi, his team wanting to keep the ball, trying to make, more space for attacking players like Xavi, and also, giving more options for him to find, it will suit him. But it's a big sort of 7 games for Xavi because he can. It's funny football, people forget what happened before and they remember the most recent thing. And if Xavi does brilliant for these 7 games, if Romero does, that will be the image and that will be the memory that goes into the summer. And then when you come back for next season, you won't think about all those times when Romero and Xavi got sent off or they were rubbish. You'll be thinking, do you remember when they scored the winner against Leeds, or they were brilliant against Everton? So these guys can sort of change the narrative of this season over the next 7 games. And I hope Xavi does, because I do have a lot of faith in him. And I think actually the club do as well. I think the whole, the club, I think even people, the Lewis family, I think they view him as kind of a real big name that could be the face of the club moving forward if he can get to grips with the Premier League. So I hope De Zerbi and his style of football will kind of gel with Xavi, and it can be a good last 7 games.
And Tom, just before you come back in, the one thing that always strikes me is the words of the other Tom Allnut, who's he's gone on holiday somewhere this week, hasn't he? The lazy so and so. But he was always saying, okay, so Thomas Frank brought Xabi in. You know, it's kind of his protege, his project. And then when Igor Tudor came in, Tudor was able to say, well, actually, I didn't buy this guy. He's not necessarily my problem. And now De Zerbi comes in, so to some extent, he's got even more right if he doesn't like the look of Xabi. He said, well, no, he's just not my type of player. So I've got the impression this actually is a really important little passage for Xavi. And I'll tell you what George says, you know, that he tries, he wants to do so much. Sometimes he seems to want to do too much. And we know that he could be so messy in possession. But there is a player there. I mean, for me, this is... a conundrum. But if he could tick some boxes over the final weeks of the season, then George is right. Come next year, we go, yeah, he's the man that kept us up, and now he's going to be the man who's going to drive us forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Igor Tudor was very damning, to be honest, on reflection of Xavi Simons. I mean, I remember that press conference where I think Ali asked him about Xavi, and he sort of, I think he said the phrase like "beautiful surprise" when Xavi had worked hard. It was real damning with faint praise. You know, really like he'd sort of given up on him being an effective part of his team, and if he did put the work in, it was a nice little surprise that he wasn't counting on. But which yeah, wow. But I actually am really excited for Xavi Simons under Roberto De Zerbi, looking at the way Roberto often has played, particularly at Brighton. Under Igor Tudor, he rarely played with the number 10. He stuck him out left. He just didn't really fit the system. Under Thomas Frank, he often played him wide left. I mean, with lack of options, they didn't get the man they wanted in Semenyo, injuries and all that kind of thing. And even when he did play him as a number 10, apart from in the Champions League, Spurs just didn't really dominate possession at all. Just didn't suit his game. George, you're absolutely right. Xavi works best when he bounces balls off players. You know, he needs players working around him. He was so isolated under the Thomas Frank era, and obviously as well under Tudor. De Zerbi, in theory, from what he's shown at Brighton, when he's up to speed, which might be next season, provided they stay up, it's very different. He's, you know, back to what I was talking about, the fullbacks coming in and working as a sort of like trio with the one of the holding midfielders. It'd be the same with the number 10, whoever plays there, whether it be Maddison or Xavi Simons. And I think Xavi's got that in his locker that it could work really well with him. I mean, you mentioned McAllister, and yes, he's obviously one of the standout number 10s during De Zerbi's time. But I'll take you back to Adam Lallana again. He loved Adam Lallana, and he often played in that number 10 role for Brighton when he was fit. He could play a lot of different positions, but he loved him there. And when you looked at the way he played, he didn't just play in that role. He would often drop really deep to pick up the ball from, you know, around the sort of deep lying playmaker role, which I think Xavi can do as well. I'm sure Maddison can as well. So if he can get him working like that, then it could really, really work. I honestly think it can click. But at the same time, I am expecting the fireworks that we will probably see on the touchline between De Zerbi and his players on a number of occasions, when they're probably not in the beginning because their confidence is so low, but when hopefully things get better, very much expecting him to go ballistic at one of his players when they're like a tiny bit out of position because he's such a perfectionist. I can see Xavi Simons being, like, you know, sort of target number 1 for him for having a sort of strop on the touchline when he's not done exactly what he wants. But that's fine, and hopefully that's what he needs. Like, what have I said throughout this season when I've been critical of Xavi? It's been how lax he can be when he gives the ball away, and you're like, you're so much better than this. And I'm really hoping that Roberto De Zerbi can be the man that can unlock his true potential.
Yeah, and I saw the pictures of De Zerbi with his arm around Lucas Bergvall. I'm getting the impression that Lucas is really going to enjoy his management as well. Archie Gray's such a fantastic player. He's going to benefit from anybody. There's another player, George, that we want to see back sooner rather than later, and who obviously could really boost our survival hopes because he's been missing for too long. When is Kudus going to be fit to play again this season?
Well, I think there was some hope it would be Sunderland. There's not been any kind of footage of him or clips of him training just yet, but that could easily be the club sort of trying to keep that under wraps. It was noticeable though with the real, you know, the excellent training ground video they put out that he wasn't there. But look, he feels very key actually to De Zerbi. And I've got a feeling, and Tom, you might back me up on this, I think De Zerbi and Brighton tried to sign Kudus in 2023, would it have been? I remember seeing that link, and then for whatever reason that move didn't happen. But that's a good sign, because clearly he rated him back then at the time anyway. And I think what he wants from his wingers, and it's why I'm quite excited about what he could do with Tell, is he wants his wingers to stay high and wide, and then when they get the ball, to beat a man and cut inside, and take shots and crosses. And that does suit Mohamed Kudus to a T. And I felt a little bit sorry for Mohamed Kudus when he did get injured, because it was so clear that the game plan from an attacking point of view was to get the ball to him and hope that he can create some magic. And it's too difficult for him, because teams worked that out. He was getting doubled up on, and I could almost sense a little bit of frustration with the crowd when he would try and beat somebody and would get tackled. And I think he was losing confidence at that time that he got injured. And really, probably different players should have been tried in that position just to ease the load on Mohamed Kudus. But hopefully this break will do him good. And if he's not available for Sunderland, or certainly not ready to start, you'd like to hope that the Brighton game, or maybe the Wolves game afterwards, he'll be available for them. And I think he feels obviously the most natural fit on the right of midfield for De Zerbi, and potentially Tell on the left as well. Two guys that are going to take shots. They are going to try and take a man on, and De Zerbi's wingers do that. Look at Mitoma. Mitoma would get the ball and fly past someone, either put a cross in or sort of cut back onto his stronger foot. So I think both Kudus and Tell should thrive, but obviously Kudus needs to get back fit. And I guess the other thing for Kudus, which hopefully is sort of motivating him to come back rather than making him worried, is the World Cup. It's obviously so big for Ghana. And for him to be involved in that, he's not going to want to rush the recovery process, but he does need games. He does need minutes to get up to sharpness. So hopefully he's back. If it's not for Sunderland, he'll be available for Brighton.
Tom, just obviously by the time Spurs play Sunderland, they could be in the relegation zone. West Ham kick off this weekend's fixtures with a match against Wolves. Do you think psychologically that will make any difference as Spurs go out at the Stadium of Light?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, being in the bottom three won't help confidence, will it? But I also think they're probably half expecting it. I mean, Wolves have been better than Tottenham this year, but they're still bottom of the table. This is a game that West Ham really need to win. Talk back about Tom Allnutt's rounds. Doesn't he talk about rounds every weekend being a round, and how they like a boxing match, and how they need to win their rounds? Well, West Ham really need to win.
By the way, he never pointed out that this was his holiday round, the lazy sod. But anyway, we'll come back to that when he returns.
Yeah. You're mentioning Tom Arnold too much on this podcast. He's not even here.
Yes.
Although I just brought him up, to be fair. He's a wise man. And that's what they need to do, don't they? So Spurs will be praying that Wolves can somehow take something off them. And it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility, but we're not expecting it, are we? And I don't know. You'd have to ask the players, wouldn't you, how much seeing themselves actually in the relegation zone would affect them psychologically. But it's hard to think it wouldn't have a bit of an effect and add a bit of extra pressure. So it's on De Zerbi to ease that pressure. I mean, that's why this is such a tough job. And we can talk all we like about I know we're probably going to round up with this at the end after we've gone through all the players, but lifting the confidence. Well, it doesn't really matter about. I mean, obviously it matters about tactics, how they get out of it, but it's the confidence and the being able to handle the pressure. Because Spurs, for so long, have been terrible under pressure, haven't they? I mean, anytime they seem to win a game, which doesn't happen too often, there's not a lot riding on it, And so, which is why why I'm actually kind of hopeful for Sunderland away, because I think it's probably about as good a game as they could have got. I'm glad it's not a home game to kick off with. Albeit I'm glad it's Brighton at home under the lights next week. Albeit I guess it's summertime now, so maybe it won't be as dark as. But I thought maybe that might be quite a good atmosphere for his first home game. But yeah, Sunderland away. Sunderland have been good at home this season. There is not pressure, I think, apart from looking at the relegation table. There's not an expectation, at least, on Spurs getting a result out of here. So that's not a bad start, I think, for De Zerbi.
Yeah, just to jump in on I guess the relegation rivals. I don't know if either of you two watched the West Ham Leeds game, but it was a crazy FA Cup tie, and West Ham were 2-0 down. Loads of their fans left, and then they get it back to 2-2. It goes to extra time, and those fans aren't actually allowed back in. Funnily enough, and then obviously West Ham lose it on penalties. And I don't know. I just wonder, if that could sort of check West Ham's momentum. I obviously hope it does as a Tottenham fan, but West Ham have been on such a good run of form. Nuno's really galvanised the whole club. London Stadium has turned into a real fortress. They've got really good results there, having struggled like Tottenham over the last few years. And it only takes one little jink in the armour, and then you're back to sort of square one. And I think Somerville wasn't involved in that game either. West Ham have really missed him, so I don't know what his fitness is like for this Wolves game. I also just think for this Wolves game, West Ham have been the ones chasing the pack for so long, and this is actually their chance to sort of you get back in front. There will be a huge amount of pressure on them for that game, so I'm sort of intrigued to see how they handle that, because I think that will be a real different challenge for them. And I guess on the flip side with Leeds are now through to the FA Cup semi-final, so that moves their weekend game with Bournemouth away to a midweek. No one wants to be going Bournemouth on a midweek, certainly not from Leeds. And they suffered a couple of injuries in that game. So, as sort of frustrated as I am to see an FA Cup semi-final line up with Southampton and Leeds, when I think, Tottenham, inconceivable, Tottenham definitely could have got there if they've, been playing well and people have been fit. I'm intrigued to see kind of the fallout of that result between Leeds and West Ham, and if it has any kind of knock-on effect. And obviously those two teams play each other on the final day as well in the Premier League. Yeah. So, it's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and obviously Wolves are playing a lot better, which is not necessarily good news because we've got to go to Molineux shortly. I did think, not that I've got any particular concern about the welfare of West Ham fans, but why were they not allowed to go back in? I mean, once the doors have opened and you go out, if your team scores, I think you've got every right to go back inside. Was there an official explanation as to why they couldn't go back in?
I think it's security reasons, because I guess anyone could go in, couldn't they? And then all of a sudden you've got loads of people in an area where there's not enough seats for them. So I think that was the sort of official reason. But yeah, it was
but George, there can't be that many people hanging around at that stage in the afternoon, just hoping to get in for the last 5 minutes.
And also, I guess Leeds fans, if any Leeds fans that couldn't get tickets for the game, maybe they can pile in. Not that I care, but that would be maybe my logical thought process.
Yep. You ever had that before, Marcus?
No, who cares?
You ever left a game early and?
Never. Well, yeah, about 3 times this season already. Never. But I mean, in a way, as a fan, you've got to stay to the bitter end. So yeah, if you're leaving early, it kind of serves you right. I've got a question for George in a moment, which is related to Arsenal, and I also want to ask you both about some comments from Sean Dyche. But just one other player who I'm intrigued to see either get on or not with De Zerbi is Richarlison. Now, how's that going to work out, do you think, boys? Because obviously we've spoken about him ad nauseum. We all know, I think deep down, that long-term he's not good enough for the club, but short-term in a relegation battle, he could be absolutely crucial. I do love his passion. I mean, he's such a complicated figure in so many different ways. Is this a match made in heaven or hell, George?
I don't think Richarlison is great for De Zerbi, to be honest. So we've all gone full circle again with Richarlison, because I was Richarlison out in probably December, November time. Then I was Richarlison massively in February and March. I think he could definitely do a job over these next 7 games, but I think De Zerbi's forwards, if I just think about, I guess, Danny Welbeck, and then even Ferguson, I can't remember his first name, the young Republic of Ireland striker, they both feel quite good at, they're both quite good at holding the ball up and link play. And obviously pressing, which Richarlison is good at pressing, but I've always thought Richarlison's sort of hold up play and link up play lets him down at times. And technically, he's not the best footballer, whereas, Solanke does have those qualities and those attributes. Solanke's hold up play when he's fit, obviously, is very good. And he's technically very good. So I would lean more towards Solanke being De Zerbi's ideal forward. But maybe, you know, Richarlison coming off the bench, 20 minutes to go, that sort of suits him anyway, doesn't it? You know, when you're lumping balls into the box, trying to get a goal, or trying to hold on. So that might be his role over the next few weeks if Solanke is obviously able to, you know, be fit and stay fit and show his best form. But yeah, I think long term for sure, Solanke is more of a fit than Richarlison.
I think the one thing about Richarlison is that we just never know what he's going to do next. Before I throw you this Spurs question, Tom, Sean Dyche was linked with a potential short-term move to Tottenham. Obviously, it didn't happen. And I hear he's come out with a few comments that, so I've only heard the gist of them. I'm thinking, why the hell's he even bothered to say it? But can you just give us a little more detail as to what the former Everton and Nottingham Forest manager has been saying about us?
He was just on TalkSport with Simon Jordan. He was asked about the job, and I think with the significant amount of money De Zerbi's being paid, you know, would he have been interested? And he just basically, first of all, he confirmed that there were no talks. I mean, what that means exactly, again, we're back in that murky sort of what's a talk, what's a bid. You know, some people think that there was interest in him. There's always representatives, but I was led to believe that there was no sort of direct talks between him and his representatives. And then he just said that he basically said that he's lucky enough in his business to be paid very well, as we know from Premier League football management. You are, and he essentially said that I suppose if Spurs had turned to him, yes, he would have been paid well because it comes with the role. But even if he kept them up, he would have very quickly seen, you know, fans not wanting him there because of the style and not doing well enough, and said he didn't really need it in his life. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but that was essentially what it was. Look, he was answering a question. He was asked about it, but I can see why it might wind you up a little bit, Marcus. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. He's not your manager,
No.
We move on.
I like Sean Dyche, and if he's been asked a question, he's got to answer it. But I think it was in the best interest of Sean Dyche and Tottenham Hotspur Football Club and all of us supporters that he was never directly connected with the team. Now, George, final one for you, and this is probably more of a reflection of the sick nature that I possess, but I'm going to give you a choice here. I mean, Spurs obviously stay out, that's what we want, but your choice is this. Will you accept Spurs being relegated if Arsenal, having very sadly gone out of the FA Cup and the League Cup in successive fixtures, also fail in their quest to become league champions, and lose to Bayern Munich in the Champions League final to a Harry Kane goal? Will you, in that instance, if that unfolds, be prepared to accept at least 12 months in the Championship with Tottenham?
Oh, I'd love the second half if it came true. No, I wouldn't accept that, because Tottenham being in the Premier League is more important than Arsenal, winning trophies or not winning trophies. But I was at the boxing on Saturday night, and I was actually watching a Tottenham fan in Vidal Riley boxing at the same time that Southampton were beating Arsenal. And yes, it was very, very enjoyable. And actually, towards the end, when full time had happened, the O2 crowd started chanting, when the Saints go marching in, and the Tottenham fan Vidal Riley gave him a little look. So I think I'd like to hope that he knew at that point that Southampton had won and Arsenal had gone out. But yeah, it's been, whilst Tottenham haven't won any games, it's been quite fun, I guess, as a Tottenham fan to see these last, we're not talking about Sporting Lisbon, but we'll talk about the cup final that Arsenal lost. And then the Southampton result was remarkable. I watched the first half and I was thinking, God, they're having a real good go, Southampton. And yeah, that was quite amusing. And actually, Man City, bizarrely, could now do a treble, couldn't they? Which nobody saw happening.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens the last few games. It could be exciting for both North London clubs.
Well, Southampton are a remarkable club. I think they're now 16 unbeaten. They put 5 past Wrexham on Tuesday night. They've gone into the playoff places, so they're having an amazing season. Look, the only reason I do ask that question, and it's like, we're going, typical Spurs, in the same way that we didn't want to beat Manchester City to make sure that Arsenal couldn't win the league a year or two ago. I just think that if Arsenal don't win anything this season, it could be hugely significant for Arteta. Whereas if they win, it could be the start of a glorious era. And on the other side, if Spurs do go down, it's horrible. But if it's only for 12 months and we come back as buoyant as we did the last time we got relegated, if you think about it, came back in 1978. We get the Argentinians within 3 years. We're winning FA Cups and European trophies again. So I'm trying to look at the bigger picture. I'm not just being a completely one-eyed Spurs fan, but I think it's very important that Arsenal don't gain any momentum this season.
You've made quite clear, Marcus, there what choice you would be picking, I think, haven't you? Now the colours to the mast. Well, look, Harry Kane's playing so well that I think he could probably do it anyway, to be honest. I think he could probably score a hat-trick in the final. I was actually lucky enough to watch Michael Olise at Crystal Palace for a few years, and I think anyone that watched him knew he was going to be an absolute world beater and sensational. So I think Bayern Munich, Arsenal in the final. I think that is meant to be the final, isn't it? If they're on different sides of the draw. Yes. So I think that could easily happen. The Harry Kane could score the winner to break their hearts. We'd enjoy that, wouldn't we? That'd be a nice end to the season.
It would. I mean, Bayern Munich still have work to do. They may have won at Real Madrid last night, but the fact that Mbappe got one back means nothing's for sure. But Tom, I apologise. I was getting involved in a slightly ridiculous conversation. But hey, Sunderland, what do we think then? You've said, Tom, that you're pleased it's an away game. The pressure's off to a degree. Sunderland are a very hard team to beat, though. I mean, I was impressed when they came and drew 1-1 at our place. Let's end with some predictions here. What's going to happen?
Yeah, you're right. They are a good team, and they've still got a fair bit to play for, haven't they? They're not that far off European places, if I remember rightly. And Regis Lebris is arguably, well, I guess it's Arteta, isn't it? But he's got to be in the frame for manager of the season, along with Keith Andrews at Brentford. And they're a really difficult team to beat or to break down, and they're really well organised. So it's going to be tricky for Spurs. I mean, I just made the point that I think that sort of lowering expectations is not a bad way to start. And it's not the same as playing Arsenal in your first game like Igor Tudor had. I think they are still beatable. I'm going to be optimistic. I don't think they're going to win, but I think they might pick up a 1-1 draw and get the De Zerbi train going.
George is our soothsayer.
I'm just looking at Sunderland's results at home of late, and makes good reading. I think they've lost their last 3 at home. Would you believe it? I won't mention
that means they need a visit from Dr. Tottenham, don't they?
Well, maybe I won't mention the last away result they had because that will hurt one of our panel. But they're a bit of a funny team. Sunderland. They've obviously had a brilliant season because they came up and been involved in the top half for all of it, haven't they? Which is a remarkable achievement. But they do seem kind of, win one, lose one, draw, win one, lose one, draw. Just looking at, they lost at home to Liverpool in February, lost at home to Fulham also in February, lost at home to Brighton last month, got knocked out by Port Vale in the FA Cup. So they're not, I think I've said this so many times, they're not beatable. They're not unbeatable, sorry. But Tottenham don't feel like they can beat anyone. But that was before De Zerbi came in, and I think we should go there with some optimism. I really think we should. Tell was training, which I sort of really think Tell could be very good under De Zerbi. So I'm pleased that he'll be available. And I guess it's kind of what does he pick really? That's the sort of probably the last thing we need to look at. Obviously, we all think Kinsey's probably going to play in goal. I mean, I've written down what I think will win a team here. Maybe a bit controversial. The back four I think probably picks itself if Udogie's had a good 2 weeks to play. So Porro, Romero, Van der Ven, Udogie. I wonder if in the midfield too he does Basuma and Gray because he needs somebody that can pass the ball. And Basuma's the best passer in the team in the midfield. And I think Gray's off the ball work of late has got to a level where I'd like to think you could trust him with someone like Basuma. So I wonder if that's what he goes with. And then as much as Koulibaly frustrates the life out of me, I think he's the kind of natural player on the right for now, if it's a 4-2-3-1 as I expect. So, Koulibaly, Xavi, Tel and Solanke would be the team that I'd go for. And I think that team can get a result. I won't say what it will be, but I think they can go there and get a result.
Yeah, I think I would concur with your lineup, I'm going to concur. Sometimes, you get that certain feeling, an absolute certainty of a scoreline. 1-1. I'm certain it's going to finish 1-1 on Sunday. It'll be a small step in the right direction. And if West Ham can stumble on Friday as well, could yet be a decent weekend as long as we all pick a Grand National winner and a Masters winner. I don't know if we're going to delve into that at the moment, but it's a great sporting weekend. Guys, thank you very much indeed. George Sessions from the Press Association, Tom Barclay from The Sun. By Sunday, it'll be 105 days since Spurs last won a Premier League game. It is time to stop the rot. I'm Marcus Buckland. Come on, you Spurs.